Arizona Territory, 1883. The sand was still warm from the day's sun when the cowboy rode into the edge of the valley, the desert wind tugging at the brim of his hat like it meant to warn him off. Dust curled behind his horse's hooves as Deacon Hart slowed to a stop, squinting toward the crooked line of cottonwoods hugging the dry riverbed. There was a cabin tucked just beneath the bluff, half hidden behind weathered beams and a rusted windmill that no longer turned. He had not planned to stop, but something about the place, the way it stood alone, quiet and worn, made him shift in the saddle. A woman was chopping wood by the side of the house. She wore a faded blue dress, sleeves rolled to her elbows, sun catching the copper strands in her dark blonde hair. She did not look up at first. Her hands moved with tired precision, like she had done the same task every day for years. When she finally glanced up, their eyes met and stayed. Deacon tipped his hat. "Evening, ma'am." She said nothing, just stared, jaw stiff, eyes sharp with something he could not place. Not fear, not exactly, but close to it. "I ain't looking for trouble," he added. "Just water. Maybe a place to rest the night." The silence stretched. Then she nodded once and turned back toward the house without a word. He dismounted, led his horse to the trough near the porch, and let it drink. The air smelled of creosote and dust. He glanced back toward the woman as she stepped through the creaking door, vanishing inside. He knocked after a minute. "If you got coffee, I can pay." The door opened, but only halfway. "You can come in," she said finally. Her voice was low, even, "But I do not want questions." "Fair enough," Deacon said. The inside of the cabin was small, plain. A stone fireplace, a cot in the corner with a patched quilt, a wooden table, one chair, a cradle pushed back against the wall, empty. He noticed the cradle the same moment she did, and she reached out quietly to turn it so the inside could not be seen. He cleared his throat. "Name's Deacon Hart." She hesitated before answering. "Keziah Lane. Thank you for letting me in, Keziah." She poured coffee into a tin cup and slid it across the table toward him. "You said you were not looking for trouble. Do not give me reason to think otherwise." "I will not." She leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere west of here. I was in Prescott a few days ago. Thought I might try my luck closer to the Colorado." He sipped the bitter coffee. "You live out here alone?" Keziah's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like a question." He held her gaze. "I am not trying to pry. Just wondering if you are safe." "I am safer alone." Deacon nodded slowly, but his eyes drifted back toward the cradle. "You got family nearby?" "No," she said. And then, after a pause, "Not anymore." The fire cracked in the hearth, and for a while they sat in silence. Deacon watched her hands, how still they were now. She was not trembling. But there was a kind of tightness in her shoulders, the kind a person carried after too many years of looking over their shoulder. "I buried it," she said finally, so sudden it startled him. "What?" "My past. Out there." She looked toward the dark window. "In the desert." He did not speak. Just let her go on if she would. "I came here 4 years ago. With my 2 children. Daniel was 8. Daisy was 6. Her voice cracked then, just slightly. "They were sick. Fever took them both. I buried them under a mesquite tree, north of here. I never went back." Deacon's throat tightened. "I am sorry. I do not need your sorrow," she said softly. He set the cup down. "Then maybe you need someone who sees you." Keziah's eyes lifted slowly to his. There was something in his tone that made her look longer this time. Like he was not just saying it. Like he meant it. She shook her head. "What I need is to be left alone." "Maybe," Deacon said. "But I do not think that is what your heart wants." She turned toward the window again, jaw clenched. "You do not know me." "No. But I would like to." Keziah scoffed. "You were just passing through." "Maybe I was," he said. "But I could stay. For a while." The next morning he was still there. She found him splitting logs behind the house, shirt off, sweat on his brow, muscles steady in the rising sun. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. "I did not ask you to stay," she said. "I know." He drove the axe into the stump. But I figured you could use the help. She frowned. I manage fine. I can see that. But folks do not have to manage alone. She did not reply, but she did not tell him to leave either. That night, they ate beans and cornbread by the fire. She watched him closely now. The way he listened when she spoke. The way he did not push, just waited. Like he knew she needed space but was not afraid to stand close. He looked up from his plate. You ever think about leaving this place? No, why not? Because if I leave, I do not know who I am without the grief. Deacon set his tin down. Maybe you do not have to carry it alone anymore. She stared at him and something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, but something less guarded. Later, when the wind picked up and the fire burned low, she stood outside by the porch, arms wrapped around herself. Deacon stepped up beside her, quiet. Do you want me gone? He asked. She looked toward him. No, she whispered. He reached out slowly and brushed her knuckles with his fingers. She did not pull away. I am not afraid of your past, he said. You should be. I am not. And for the first time in 4 years, Keziah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, healing did not have to mean forgetting. Maybe it meant remembering the pain and letting someone else carry part of it. She looked up at him, eyes shining in the moonlight. Then stay. He nodded once. I will. By late March, the mesquite trees began to leaf, and the desert turned soft with color. The rains had come and gone, leaving the land more forgiving. Deacon had not yet spoken of leaving again, and Keziah had not once asked when he might. They moved around one another with the ease of people who had stopped expecting disappointment but still hadn't learned how to hope out loud. He repaired the roof one morning after a windstorm loosened half the shingles. She watched from the garden where she knelt planting beans, her hands sunk in the damp soil. The sound of his hammer punctuated the quiet, steady, and certain. When he climbed down, she handed him a damp cloth. Instead of taking it, he brushed a thumb across her cheek where soil had smudged it. Her breath caught. Your seeds will take, he said, his voice low. They always do if the ground's ready. They stood like that a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned back to the rose without another word. That evening, she brought out a small tin box from beneath the floorboard. He didn't ask what was in it, but she opened it anyway. Inside were folded papers, brittle with age, and a ribbon the color of dried lavender. My mother's, she said. She used to tie it in Daisy's hair. I keep it to remember something soft. Deacon nodded, not reaching for it, just watching her fingers as they rested on the edge of the fabric. I was born in Arkansas, she said. Hot Springs. My father ran a livery. We never had much, but I liked the smell of hay and leather. I miss it more than I thought I would. You ever think of going back? There's no one left there who knows me without the weight. He didn't press. Instead, he took a folded piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the table. It was creased and worn, an old army muster record. I got conscripted late, he said. 1865. Just for clean-up duty in Missouri. Never saw a shot fired. Spent more time hauling lumber than anything else. She traced the edge of the paper with one finger. Did you want to fight? I wanted to matter. Thought maybe the uniform would make me someone. Did it? No, he said. But it taught me who I wasn't. She smiled, faint and fleeting, and the fire crackled between them. Later that week, they rode out together for the first time. Her old gelding limped a little but held steady. Deacon rode ahead, scanning the horizon. They passed cacti blooming with the first prickly pears and a cluster of wild burros grazing by the rocks. She led him to the bluff north of the cabin where the mesquite grew gnarled and thick. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that felt like breath held just below the surface. She dismounted without speaking, and he followed. The graves were marked only by stone, weathered, uncarved, but lovingly placed. She knelt and brushed wind-blown sand from the base of one, her hand lingering. I haven't come here since the second winter, she said. Couldn't bear to see it without hearing their voices. He crouched beside her. You don't owe it to them to stay in sorrow. I know. She looked over at him. But sometimes I think if I stop grieving, it means they're truly gone. He shook his head. It means you made room for something else. Doesn't mean you forget. She met his gaze, and something new passed between them, no longer wary, no longer guarded. On the way back, she rode closer to him. At one point, her shoulder brushed his, and she didn't pull away. When they reached the fence line, she handed him the reins of her horse without a word and walked ahead to unlatch the gate. That night, she set a second plate without asking. They shared dinner in the hush that had become familiar, but there was warmth in it now, not avoidance. When the dishes were done, she lit the lamp and sat in the chair by the hearth, fingers working a scrap of cloth into a new quilt square. Deacon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Do you miss being cared for?" She didn't look up. "I miss being seen without having to explain myself." He crossed the room and crouched beside her. "You don't have to explain anything to me." "I know," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "That's what scares me." He reached for her hand, gently. She let him take it. "You're not alone anymore, Keziah. Not unless you choose to be." Silence settled again, but this time it felt like peace. When she rose to bank the fire, he followed. She turned, and he was closer than he'd ever stood. Her hands were still warm from the needlework. "I don't know what comes next," she said. He brushed her hair back from her face. "Then we'll find out together." She leaned into him, slow and certain. When their lips met, it wasn't desperate, it was quiet, like the desert after rain. And for the first time in a long while, Keziah Lane let herself believe in something new. By late April, the wind changed. It carried the scent of distant cottonwood blooms and the sharp bite of dry stone. Keziah stood at the edge of her garden one morning, watching the sky turn pale with first light, when she heard the soft clatter of hooves behind her. Deacon had returned from checking the southern fence line, dust streaked across his forearms, his hat tilted low. "Wire's holding," he said, dismounting. "But something's been digging near the eastern post." "Might be coyote." She nodded, brushing damp soil from her palms. "I'll come out with you after breakfast." He glanced toward the field. "You've got seedlings up. Corn and squash. The beans are slower, but they'll catch." Deacon tied the reins to the post, his gaze drifting toward the shed. "I was thinking about building a smokehouse. If we get a deer this season, it'd keep longer than salting." Keziah tilted her head. "You planning to stay that long?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, steady. "I haven't wanted to leave." The quiet that settled between them wasn't uncertain, it was waiting for something to be named. They rode out after breakfast, rifles slung across their backs, the sun already sharp. The trail curved around a dried arroyo where the scrub brush grew thick and low. Near the fence, Deacon dismounted and crouched by the tracks. "Only one set of prints," he said. "Could be a lone dog, but it's too broad for that. Might be a young cougar." Keziah dismounted and stepped beside him, her boots sinking into the soft dust. "If it's that close to the house, it's desperate." They walked the line together, quiet but alert. When they reached the edge of her northern boundary, she paused, eyeing the old rock wall her son had helped her build. It had slumped where the rains had washed out the base. "I need to shore this up before the monsoons come," she said, touching one of the loose stones. "I'll haul river rock from the wash next week," Deacon offered. She turned to him, the brim of her hat casting a shadow across her cheek. "You talk like this place is yours." "I talk like it could be." The words hung there, simple and unforced. That evening, Keziah lit a lantern before dusk fully settled. Deacon sat at the table, oiling the hinges of her father's old saddle. She brought over a bowl of warm water and a cloth, then sat across from him. "My brother used to do that," she said. "He'd spend hours keeping the tack clean, even when we had no stock worth saddling." He looked up. "Where is he now?" "Lost outside of Fort Smith. Caught in a flash flood back in '71. She dipped the cloth and wrung it out. "He was the last person who made me laugh without effort." Deacon set the saddle aside. "You've laughed with me." She didn't deny it. "Not without effort." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "What would it take for it to come easy?" Keziah studied him for a long moment. "If I knew, I'd have done it by now." He didn't try to fix the weight behind her words. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small folded square of cloth, deep green calico. "Worn but whole. I found this in Yuma last winter." Meant to trade it for tobacco, but I kept it. She unfolded it slowly. It's too fine for trade. I didn't want it for trade. She smoothed it across her lap, fingers lingering. You bring me things I don't ask for. You don't ask for much. I learned not to. Deacon's voice was quiet. You don't have to keep living like you're waiting for something to go wrong. Keziah stood, walked to the window, and leaned her forehead against the frame. When you bury children, you don't expect anything to go right again. He crossed the room but didn't touch her. You've let me in, Keziah. That counts for something. She turned then, slowly, her face unreadable. I don't know what to do with peace. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Just let it be. Her voice was barely audible. I'm tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe there's no other shoe. Maybe this is the part where things hold. She stepped forward and rested her hand against his chest. You make it sound easy. I know it's not. He covered her hand with his. But I'd stay to figure it out. The next morning, she opened the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside were the last things she hadn't touched in years. A locket with her children's hair, her wedding band, and a letter from her mother, creased and unread since the day it came. She held it for a long while, then set it aside and closed the lid. Outside, Deacon was already at work, hammering new slats into the corral gate. She stepped onto the porch, watching him a moment before calling out. If you build that smokehouse, I'll help you cure the meat. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. I was hoping you'd say that. She descended the steps and walked toward him, boots crunching over gravel. When she reached him, he set the hammer down and she surprised them both by leaning in to kiss him, slow and certain. When she pulled back, she met his eyes without hesitation. I don't want to live scared anymore. You won't have to, he said. Not with me. And in that wide, quiet stretch of land, beneath the open sky, something solid took root. Not a promise, not yet, but the shape of one. The first real heat settled over the valley in early May, the kind that pressed against skin like a held breath. Cicadas sang out from the brush as Keziah and Deacon moved slow through the long days, the rhythm of shared work knitting their time tight. He no longer slept in the barn. She hadn't asked him to move inside and he hadn't spoken on it, but one morning she found his bedroll folded on the shelf beside hers and left it there. She spent most of that day at the wash basin behind the house, starching and wringing linens, her hands raw by midday. Deacon returned from riding fence near dusk, his shirt clinging to him from the heat, and she handed him a tin cup of rainwater from the barrel without a word. He drank, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Saw Ryder up on the northern ridge. Too far to make the face, but they weren't moving fast. She set the bucket down. You think they're passing through? Hard to say. They stopped a while. Might have been watching. Her jaw tightened. Not many come from that way. I know. She crossed her arms. There was a man once. He came from the north too. Deacon didn't speak. He waited. I met him in Santa Fe. He wasn't my children's father. She looked out at the darkening hills. He said he was a trader, but he lied. Took what little I had left and vanished while my son was fevered in bed. Deacon's voice was low. He hurt you. Not with his hands. But he left me with less than nothing. She looked back at him. That was 4 years ago, and I still wake expecting to hear his horse outside some nights. He won't take anything from you again. She nodded once, then turned away, pulling the last sheet from the line. There's a pistol in the pantry. I keep it loaded. I figured. Later that night, the wind rose, dry and restless. Deacon stepped outside to secure the porch shutters and found her sitting on the steps. Her hair pulled back, feet bare against the wood. She didn't turn when he approached. I used to sing, she said, her voice barely above the wind. Quiet, but enough to comfort the little ones. He sat down beside her. You stopped. After them, it felt like a lie. He rested his hands on his knees. You ever think of starting again? I wouldn't know what to sing. Maybe something new. Something just for now. She looked toward him, the porch lamp catching her eyes. You ever been married? He shook his head. Came close once. She was a widow with land near Footbowie. We made plans. Then her husband's brother came back from Montana and claimed the property. She chose blood over me. Did it break you? No, he said, but it made me cautious. She studied him. You don't seem cautious anymore. I'm not. For a long time, neither moved. Then she stood and extended her hand. Come inside. He followed, closing the door behind them. That night, she let herself sleep with her head against his shoulder, her breath slow, her hand resting lightly on his chest. He didn't shift. By morning, she was up first, already pulling the kettle over the coals when he stirred. She poured his cup without being asked and handed it to him as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes. There's a letter, she said, hidden in the floorboard by the hearth. Came from my cousin in Texas last spring. Said there's work near the Sabine River. A school needs a woman to keep books and teach letters. He sipped. You thinking about going? I was. Before you. He met her gaze. Do you regret staying? She shook her head. But I need to know you won't disappear like the rest. I won't. You've said that. I meant it. She turned back to the stove. Then plant your boots here. For real. Not just for the season. I already have. Later, they rode out with the wagon to gather dry mesquite for the smokehouse frame. The sun bore down, and their shirts clung to their backs, but they worked without complaint. When they stopped for a rest in the shade of a rock outcrop, she pulled a cloth from her satchel and handed him a small square of cornbread. He bit into it. You used honey this time. I did. You cook like you're learning again. I am. She leaned back against the stone and closed her eyes. I used to think I'd never share a meal like this again. Not without ghosts hanging over the table. They're still there, he said. But they don't run the place. She opened her eyes. No. They don't. That evening, as they watched the smokehouse frame take shape against the crimson sky, she reached for his hand without needing to think. And when dusk fell full and the coyotes called from the far hills, Keziah Lane stood beside the man who had not run, the man who had seen her fear and stayed, and she no longer felt like she was bracing for a storm. She had come to the desert to bury the past. But now she was planting something else. Something that wanted to grow. The smokehouse stood solid now, its frame cured by sun and wind. Cedar planks darkened by oil Deacon had boiled down from rendered fat. Keziah ran her hand along the door's edge, where he'd carved a small symbol half-circle over a short line, like a rising sun. She didn't ask what it meant. She knew. It was the kind of thing a man built only when he meant to stay. That morning, she had risen before dawn, not from worry or memory, but from habit. The air was still cool, and dew clung to the lower fence rails. Inside, Deacon was still asleep, one hand resting palm up beside him. She tucked the blanket around his shoulder and stepped outside with her shawl pulled tight. The land was shifting again. Not in a way most would notice, but she had lived quiet long enough to see small things. The rabbits no longer bolted when she passed the rye stalks. The hawk that had nested above the bluff circled lower now, wings slow and wide. The desert had stopped bracing against her presence. She saddled the mule and rode west to the ridge alone, needing the silence. At the top, she dismounted and sat in the red dirt beside a half-dead ocotillo. From there, she could see the whole stretch of valley, the cabin a soft square tucked beneath the bluff, the smokehouse behind it, the garden in its second greening. When she returned near midday, Deacon was hauling water from the lower trough. She tied the mule alongside the shed and walked to him. I want to give you something, she said. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm. What's that? She held out a small piece of paper carefully folded. Daniel drew it, the day before he fell ill. Deacon took it, unfolding it with care. The drawing was crude, just stick figures, a crooked house, and what might have been a tree. But the lines were bold. He told me it was our future ranch, she said, with horses and chickens and a fence with no gaps. Deacon studied it. He gave you a dream. I'd buried it, she said, but I think maybe it's time to plant it again. He folded the paper slowly and handed it back. Then let's build it, one post at a time. Later, they cleared the north field together, hauling away down branches and uprooting mesquite stumps too close to the fence line. Deacon paused once to watch the way Keziah's braids stuck to the curve of her neck in the heat. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, mud smeared along her forearms. "You ever think about what comes 10, 20 years from now?" he asked. She straightened, leaning on her shovel. "I used to be afraid to. Now I think about what we'd pass down." "To who?" She hesitated. "I don't know, but I've been thinking. There's a girl out in Sonoyta, a foundling the church took in. She's about 12. Quiet, but she can read. I met her once before you came. I sent her a pair of shoes through the traveling preacher. You think she'd want to come here?" "I think she might," Keziah said. "If we made room." Deacon nodded. "Then we will." That night, they didn't light the lantern. They sat on the porch with their boots off and their bare feet on the warm wood. The moon rose slow behind the ridge, silvering the tops of the mesquite. "I never thought I'd trust like this again," she said, her voice low. "You didn't have to," Deacon said. "You just had to let it happen." She reached out and ran her fingers along the seam of his jeans where the fabric had been patched with hers. "I used to believe love was something that ended," she said. "And now I believe it's something you build. With time. With hands." He took her hand in his. "Then let's keep building." She leaned in and kissed him, not out of longing, but out of certainty. Weeks passed. The girl from Sonoyta arrived in early June, brought by the circuit preacher and a woman from the mission. Her name was Clara, and she looked at Keziah like she wasn't sure whether to run or cry. Keziah knelt and offered her a tin cup of water and a checked apron sewn from scraps. "You don't owe us anything," she said. "But if you want to stay, you'll have a place." Clara nodded once, gripping the apron. By the end of summer, the girl followed Keziah in the garden and sat beside Deacon when he sharpened tools. She didn't talk much, but she watched everything. One evening, Keziah sat brushing Clara's hair beside the fire while Deacon read aloud from a newspaper he'd brought back from Bisbee. The room smelled of cured meat and sage. Outside, the wind stirred the trees gently. Deacon folded the paper and looked at Keziah. "You ever think of marrying me?" She looked up, her eyes steady. "I have." "Well," she smiled. "I will." They wed beneath the bluff in early fall, with Clara standing beside them, holding a bouquet of desert marigolds and sunflower heads. The preacher spoke plain words, and the vows were quiet but true. There was no audience but the wind and the rising sun. Afterward, Keziah and Deacon stood with hands clasped, the earth warm beneath their feet, the future wide as the land around them. And when they walked back to the cabin together, with Clara skipping just ahead, Keziah knew no part of her heart had been left behind. She had not just survived the desert, she had made a life in it. A home. A family. And in that quiet stretch of Arizona land, love did not arrive like thunder. It came like morning, slow and certain, and here to stay.